Chicago sits at the southwestern shore of Lake Michigan, where the Chicago River meets one of the Great Lakes. This location made it a natural crossroads between the eastern United States and the developing western territories. When the city was incorporated in 1837, it served primarily as a transportation hub, with waterways connecting the lake to the Mississippi River system through the Illinois and Michigan Canal. Early buildings reflected this frontier character, constructed primarily of wood and simple, functional forms that prioritized speed and economy over architectural refinement. The rapid expansion of railroads in the 1850s and 1860s transformed Chicago into the nation's central rail junction. Grain elevators, warehouses, and stockyards grew along the rail lines, while commercial districts developed near the lakefront and river. By 1870, the city's population had surpassed 300,000, and construction accelerated to accommodate both business expansion and residential growth. Brick and stone gradually replaced timber in commercial construction, though it remained common in residential neighborhoods. The density of wooden structures, combined with dry autumn conditions, created conditions that would prove catastrophic. The Great Fire of October 1871 destroyed approximately 3.5 square miles of the city, consuming most of the downtown commercial core and large sections of residential areas. While devastating, the fire created an unprecedented opportunity for rebuilding on a massive scale. City officials enacted new building codes requiring fireproof construction in the central business district, mandating brick, stone, or iron for exterior walls. This regulatory framework, combined with abundant capital and urgent demand for new buildings, set the stage for significant architectural innovation. The decades following the fire witnessed intensive construction activity. Chicago became a testing ground for new building technologies and structural systems. The development of steel frame construction emerged from engineering, challenges posed by the city's marshy soil conditions and the economic pressure to maximize buildable height on expensive downtown lots. Rather than relying on thick masonry walls to support tall buildings, engineers began designing internal metal skeletons that carried the building's weight, allowing exterior walls to serve primarily as weatherproofing enclosures. The Home Insurance Building, completed in 1885, demonstrated early applications of metal framing in a tall office structure. This approach to construction allowed buildings to rise higher while maintaining relatively slender profiles. The Rookery and the Monadnock Building exemplified contrasting approaches to the design of tall commercial structures during this transitional period. The Monadnock's thick masonry load-bearing walls represented the culmination of traditional construction methods, while buildings designed with steel frames pointed toward future possibilities. By the 1890s, Chicago had developed a distinctive approach to tall building design that architectural historians often refer to as the Chicago School. This design philosophy emphasized clear expression of structural systems, large windows to maximize natural light in deep office floors, and tripartite composition, treating the building facade as a column with base, shaft, and capital. Terracotta cladding became prevalent, offering fire resistance, decorative possibilities, and lighter weight than stone. The Reliance Building and the Carson Pirie Scott Store demonstrated refined applications of these principles, with large Chicago windows and carefully detailed ornamentation. The world's Columbian Exposition of 1893 introduced alternative architectural visions to the city. The fair's White City presented Beaux-Arts classicism on a grand scale, with symmetrical planning, monumental columns, and extensive use of classical ornament. This aesthetic influenced Chicago's civic architecture in subsequent decades, visible in buildings like the Chicago Public Library and the Field Museum. The Exposition also showcased comprehensive planning concepts that would influence later efforts to organize Chicago's growth through systematic urban design. Residential architecture during the late 19th and early 20th centuries developed distinct patterns across different neighborhoods. Workers' cottages and two-flats filled areas near industrial zones, built two simple plans with minimal ornamentation. Graystone apartment buildings and courtyard complexes became characteristic of neighborhoods along new streetcar and elevated train lines. Prairie school principles, emphasizing horizontal lines, natural materials, and integration with the landscape, influenced residential design in both city and suburban contexts. Particularly in areas like Oak Park and Hyde Park, the expansion of Chicago's elevated rapid transit system and surface streetcar network enabled residential development far from the downtown core. Neighborhoods developed their own commercial corridors along transit routes, creating a multi-centered metropolitan pattern rather than a single dominant downtown. Brick 2-flats and 3-flats became the predominant housing type in many areas. It's designed to accommodate both owner occupancy and rental income. Bungalow construction proliferated in the 1910s and 1920s, particularly on the city's northwest and southwest sides, providing modest single-family homes on narrow lots within neighborhoods supported by streetcar access. The implementation of the 1909 Plan of Chicago brought comprehensive urban planning to the city's physical development. Prepared by commercial and civic leaders, the plan proposed coordinated improvements to lakefront parks, arterial boulevards, rail terminals, and regional open space systems. While not all elements were realized, the plan influenced major infrastructure decisions, including the preservation and development of the lakefront as public parkland and the construction of Wacker Drive along the Chicago River. The plan represented an early American application of city beautiful principles to metropolitan scale planning. Skyscraper construction continued through the 1920s, producing towers like the Wrigley Building and the Tribune Tower along the newly developed Michigan Avenue corridor north of the river. The Chicago Board of Trade building rose at the southern terminus of LaSalle Street. Its Art Deco, massing, and ornament, reflecting contemporary design trends while responding to the canyon-like character of the financial district. Setback regulations influenced building forms, encouraging towers that stepped back from the street as they rose. Though Chicago's requirements differed from those implemented in New York, the Great Depression halted most private construction. In World War II, further limited building activity. Post-war development brought significant changes to Chicago's architectural landscape. Urban renewal programs cleared substantial areas of older housing, particularly in neighborhoods near downtown. The construction of large-scale public housing, projects introduced superblock planning and high-rise residential towers in areas like the near South Side and near West Side Highway. Construction cut through established neighborhoods, altering circulation patterns and separating previously connected areas. The 1950s and the 1960s saw modernist principles applied to both commercial and institutional architecture. The Inland Steel Building and similar downtown towers employed curtain wall construction, with glass and metal exterior surfaces hanging from internal structural frames. This approach created uniformly gridded facades quite different from the articulated bases and cornices of earlier skyscrapers. Mies van der Rohe's work in Chicago, including residential towers and the Federal Center complex, exemplified rigorous application of steel and glass. Modernism with precisely detailed construction and refined proportions. The construction of the John Hancock Center and the Sears Tower introduced structural expressionism to Chicago's skyline. With exterior diagonal bracing and bundled tube engineering systems visible in the building's forms, these towers reached unprecedented heights while exploring how structural systems could shape architectural character. The development of Illinois Center and other large-scale projects consolidated multiple buildings, plazas, and underground circulation into unified complexes, reflecting planning concepts that prioritized automobile access and separation of pedestrian and vehicular movement. Historic preservation emerged as a significant concern by the 1970s, as the loss of notable buildings like the Chicago Stock Exchange prompted efforts to protect architecturally significant structures. Landmark designation programs created protections for individual buildings and districts, helping maintain the character of areas like the Loops Theater District and residential neighborhoods with concentrations of historic building stock. Adaptive reuse of older industrial and commercial buildings. demonstrated that obsolete structures could be transformed for contemporary uses while retaining their architectural character. Late 20th century. Architecture in Chicago reflected diverse approaches, from postmodern experiments referencing historical styles to continued explorations of modernist principles. Infill construction in established neighborhoods increasingly respected existing scale and materials. Rather than imposing contrasting contemporary forms, residential development along the river and in former industrial areas converted obsolete manufacturing buildings while introducing new construction in previously underutilized zones. The city's building tradition, grounded in structural expression and material honesty, continued to influence how contemporary designers approached new projects. Today, Chicago's built environment contains architectural evidence spanning more than a century and a half of urban development. The street grid laid out in the 19th century still organizes most of the city. Neighborhoods retain characteristic building types from their periods of initial development, whether brick two-flats, graystones, or bungalows. The downtown preserves examples of early skyscraper design alongside mid-century modernist towers and contemporary high-rises. The lakefront remains largely open as parkland, fulfilling visions articulated more than a century ago. Chicago's architecture documents the economic forces, technological capabilities, and design aspirations that shaped its transformation from a frontier trading post to a major metropolitan center, maintaining within its structures and districts the accumulated choices of successive generations of builders, engineers, and planners who constructed this city at the edge of the inland sea.